to Everything's Cleaner in Texas, the show where we spotlight the people, processes, and products that are helping Texas clean freaks fight dirty better. From hospital sterilization teams to cutting-edge technology, from deep cleaning secrets to industry game changers, if it's making Texas fight dirty, we're going to talk about it on this show. My name's Hank Balch, alongside Dusty Glass, and every episode we'll be diving deep with the experts, innovators, and frontline fighters who are setting the gold standard for cleanliness across the Lone Star State. Because in Texas, we don't just fight dirty, we do it big. So grab your boots, buckle up, it's time to get clean. Howdy there, clean freaks. My name's Hank Balch. You're listening to Texas's favorite podcast on the sterile processing front. This is Everything's Cleaner in Texas. I'm back in studio today with our co-host, Dusty Glass. What's going on, Dusty?
No, I'm doing well, Hank. Thanks.
Good. So we've got a fantastic interview today. It's going to be a really interesting one. I know earlier in the season, we talked to Chevelle Speed on, hey, what's life like recruiting, retaining, training, building a sterile processing program in the middle of it all, in the middle of a large city in Texas or a large metroplex, in this case in Dallas-Fort Worth. Great insight, great best practices that Chevelle was able to share on that interview. Well, today we're going kind of to the other end of the spectrum. We're going to be talking to Lea Clift out there in West Texas. What life is like out there on the lone prairie, if you will, although it's not quite as lone. Like, you know, people have this perspectively of, you're riding horses to work, there's tumbleweeds everywhere. Like, maybe you see some tumbleweeds every now and then, but they've got buildings, they've got transportation. I mean, it's not the Wild West in the old days, but still, it's also not Dallas-Fort Worth. It's not Houston, Texas. And so there's all kinds of differences there. So we're looking forward to digging into that today with Lea Clift, the VP of the DFW HSPA chapter, as well as a sterile processing manager out there in West Texas. So Lea, welcome to the show today.
Thank you so much.
I didn't know this until we started talking right before this interview, but you actually know Chevelle Speed, obviously, because you're in the same chapter as well. But it was a great reminder of, even though we're one of the biggest state, we are the biggest state in the contiguous 48. Okay, we can claim that. We're one of the biggest states in the whole country, and a lot of like space and distance between towns, especially as you start getting out that direction. And yet, it is a very small world in the sterile processing space. People know people. We remember people. We hire the same people. We work in the same facilities. And that's a good reminder for any technician out there on just how you work and how the quality of your work will follow you for the rest of your career, no matter where you go, inside or outside of Texas. But anywho, big state, small world. Give us a little bit of background in how you got to where you are today in your role, and then also how you ended up out there in West Texas.
Yeah, I've been in the medical field for about 30 years now. I started out in the Air Force as a surgical tech, and did that route, and that's basically what started everything for me. So for the past few years, I always joke with everybody that I have more certification credentials after my name than I actually have in my name, because my name is so short.
You got more letters. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, letters after they did.
Absolutely. And so it takes forever if I have to put that on paper or try to fill a spot. So started out in the Air Force as a surgical tech, became a first assist. I am currently still licensed as a surgical assist here in the state. I worked independently for a while for a few surgeons here in this area. I am from the DFW area. I actually graduated high school from that area. So I joined the military, came back, got married, moved to East Texas, down to Lufkin and Nacogdoches, and stayed there for about 12 years.
That's deep. That's deep, East Texas out there.
Worked there in VOR and did some SPD. You know, the funny thing, when you are military trained or you have that background, when you start out in the OR, they usually teach you. You learn SPD. That's just how that works. It's not a voluntary thing. You just do your rounds and you do your training. So in my experience on the civilian sector, it was always one of those things where when questions would pop up or they had the need to fill in a spot, it was go grab Lee, get her in here because she's going to be familiar. We're not training somebody brand new. So I've always had my foot, kind of both feet in both areas and kind of bounce back and forth. Some of the smaller surgery centers that I had worked in, I would scrub cases and run back to SPD and try to, clean and do whatever I need to do to get sets reprocessed, get ready for the next day because I acted as the coordinator for there and just kind of bounce back and forth. So about 10 years ago, I thought I had gotten recruited to come out to West Texas. And believe it or not, I'd never been out here.
Okay. Texas is a big state, right?
Never been out to El Paso, never been to Amarillo. Had no desire to. I like trees. And so...
tall trees, right?
Yes, we have no trees out here. I spoke to a recruiter and they were like, hey, I've got this small little facility that is just in dire need, blah, 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 and made me an offer that I couldn't refuse. And I was like, well, let's do this. And went out there and it was... no trees. It was dirt. It was it was a big culture shock. I think my daughter, who was 4 at the time, thought, Mommy, they don't have trees out here. They have metal trees, talking about the wind turbines.
Yeah.
So
it's like you moved us to the moon or something, right? Like, what the heck?
Tumbleweeds, especially here lately with all the windstorms that we've been having and the haboos that we get. So constantly smelling dirt all day long.
Wow. So, Dusty, remind me, I know your background is military too, but you weren't a surgical tech in the military. You were a medic. Is that right?
Yeah. So I was a combat medic in the Army.
Okay. That's right.
Which, for us, the great thing about the Army, I will say is that your scope of practice is what your PA allows for you to do. And just like what Lee was kind of saying is that there is no boundaries like what you have here where it's very linear, divided of scrub tech, LPN, RN, first assist. Your PA is going to train you to do all of those things. So that is, we did all of the things. We helped scrub, we helped assist. So, we reprocessed all of our instrumentation. We were a Swiss Army knife of whatever our PA trained us to do.
Yeah, that's great. I really liked that topic came up again. I was telling Lee before we got started in my interview with Nate Gonzalez on the topic of the crossover between the Navy and sterile processing. He brought that up too, just like the scope of experience that you're able to gain. And then once you get out of the military into the civilian side, you're able to kind of look at problems within sterile processing from a different perspective that, guys like me, I never worked in the military. I've never worked in the OR. I've just always only been SPD. So I can experience that kind of through conversation and through observation, but nothing probably really compares to being in it, doing it, having the connections, having that exposure like you guys have shared. I think that's a very valuable credential, but then also just very valuable life experience coming into SPD. So West Texas, you shared a little bit, Lee, about the impact that your daughter's like, hey, look at all the metal trees and stuff, and then you're tasting the dirt and whatnot, but kind of zero in on specifically what the shift was like for you in those first couple of weeks or months in, coming from the various areas that you have worked in, obviously, to West Texas. What are some of those first things that stuck out as different in your sterile processing responsibilities?
Education, I would say, probably is one of the biggest issues, just because not that it doesn't happen everywhere. It happens. We all know that it happens everywhere where people just think it's a plug and play situation where you have a need, you have an FTE that's open. Why can't you just hire, Billy that's, needing a job. He's my mother's cousin's son or whatever, and he doesn't know anything about the medical field, but I'm sure he can learn it. How hard could it be? Right. So when I came out this way, it was a little bit more intense with that thought process. You had some people who had been in their roles for 30 years themselves, no formal training of any kind. And I don't knock that. I think trades and OJT is a fantastic thing. But I think that in our field, as technology progresses, we have to progress with it, right? We have to keep up. And when standards change, you need to know. I don't know how many people, one of my first questions were, because I don't claim to know every instrument out there. I don't claim to know how to reprocess any, every single instrument that comes through. I'm not that person. So my question is always like, do you have an IFU handy? I'm real big on just hand me the IFU. I'll figure it out if you'll give me the paperwork. And I don't know how many vendors I came across and staff that were like, a what? What do you, an IA what? And it was always a struggle at first to kind of say, okay, well, this is what I need from you, and we can go from there. And I think that's probably...
This is just like 10 years ago, right? Yeah. So like we're talking like 2015, 2014, 2015.
And it still happens. It still happens. I'm almost 50 myself, so I don't want to, pick on folks my age group. But when you have been in a role for so long and this is how you've been trained to do it, that's how you're going to do it. And change is hard. Change is really hard when you have the pressure of your OR crew, your surgical techs, your nurses, your surgeons who are like, let's go. I don't understand. I have 8 cases, 2 trays. Come on. What is the problem? Let's go. In fact, it wasn't just a couple of weeks ago. I was in kind of a senior meeting with some physicians, some surgeons that I work with. And one of them had stated very clearly, we were talking about bioburden, biofilm left on instruments, because that's one of those, hot topics. He blatantly just stated, listen, my surgical tech's job is to hand me instruments. That's all they are responsible for. That's all they need to be concerned with, is handing me my instruments. And the surgical tech in me was like, oh, no, heck no. Yeah. That's not how that works either.
There's a little bit more that goes into that.
A little bit more. And, we actually we didn't argue, but my director actually stepped in and was like, well, no, there's point of use and everything else that goes underneath that is part of their job. That's their responsibility. And he was like, well, I disagree. And then he looked over at me and he was like, your responsibility is to wash and run my instruments. I don't know how hard that can be. I mean, come on, guys. And it was like, okay, well, clearly we're not on the same page. So, and that's now. I mean, that's this year. So that mentality still, I haven't worked in a lot of other states and other big cities in those facilities. I don't know how to compare that to, but I'm sure I'm not the only one who still deals with that thought process of trying to explain that there's so much more to what we do.
No, that's so true, Lee. And it's funny that you bring that up, and dealing with those leadership, those physicians in particular, that they have their own perspective. They're trying to get those cases done. They look at it as, you got the instruments. Why are they not clean? Why are they not sterile back to me? I don't understand, right? When you're dealing with all those things, like, I'm curious, because we always talk about retention and burnout. But from your perspective, how do you refill your tank and kind of get that enjoyment and that passion back after doing this for so long?
Not gonna lie, it's hard. Some days I'm like, man, I'm almost, I turned 50 this year, and I'm like, I keep asking my husband, am I close to retirement yet? Like, are we there?
You got the calendar and you're like counting all the days.
Is it possible for me to retire? And, I got my little social security email that says, where you can look it up and see the balance of where you would be. And I noticed on there it said 70, you'll get maxed out, and you can get this much. And I was like, 70, I ain't going to make it. So I think it's just for me, it's a lot of education and just trying to spread the importance of what we do to even, to just the staff that I work with every day, and letting them know how important they are and what they do. And my students, when I'm teaching a class, I try to do the same thing to let them know that we are so much more. When I became a surgical tech, and they used to sit there and say, the technologist versus the technician, and those two roles, the definition of the both. And I never understood why we weren't ologists ourselves, just because there's so much more with what we do. I mean, there's a whole scientific knowledge process that we have to have, that it's so much more than just washing instruments. And so when you start talking about IFUs and the steam sterilizers and, the pressures and what we have to run on, and having to break all of that down, even the materials with how we ultrasonic everything, it's so much more. And so I think I take pride in that, in knowing that we do contribute. and that we are getting there versus 10 years ago, 20 years ago. We are making a difference by talking about it and really getting it out there. So my goal, I think right now, is to tell people it's okay to bring out your dirty laundry when it comes to SPD, and let's talk about it. Let's talk about your quality audits and such.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Lea. That's been a reoccurring theme over the past 5 or 6 years for me, is if we try to paint this rosy picture of the industry or even our own departments, if we paint that rosy picture too often, then our administrators get this idea that, okay, there's nothing wrong. They don't need any support. They don't need any investment. They've got it all together. And there's a tension, as a department leader, like you don't want to look like it's out of control. Like you don't want to make it sound like I can't fix this. It's too complex. It's too problematic. But you may feel that way some days, especially if you don't have the resources, you don't have the people, you don't have the retention. But I always encourage people, just like you said, to be transparent that, hey, we have challenges and we need help. And I could go all the way to the provider side, where we've got surgeons here who truly do not understand the complexity of our jobs. And then it can go all the way back down, to educating our vendors who work with us, or, new technicians. Hey, do we even have any kind of onboarding type of orientation? Or is it just you're on the street one day and the next day you're processing grandma's heart instruments? And that happens. We need to talk about that, and we need to all be honest that the solution is not easy. It's not just like, oh, I want to fix it and then therefore it's done. It's a process. It's progress. It's a team sport. All of that plays out. But, that kind of leads me, I guess, into a question that we have touched on here and there a couple of times. So I want to dive in a little bit deeper. You mentioned the recruiting dynamics of, hey, because there's less people and access to people, then naturally your recruiting pool is smaller. And there can be a temptation, I don't know, a better phrase, like a good old boy kind of network, where if you know somebody, regardless of your other credentials and like your skill set and everything else, as long as like your aunt works here and she can get you a job here, that's probably not a good best practice for hiring the best candidates. But yeah, talk to us, like, for people, again, who haven't worked in the scenarios of being kind of remote out from large metropolitan areas, but still have a very critical job to do. What's that life like in like the day-to-day SPD, the recruiting, retention, your vendor relationships? Kind of talk through all that for us.
So here in West Texas, that good old boy network is alive and well. We live it daily here. A lot of our vendors have been in this area for many years. They have worked hand in hand. They play golf with the surgeons that they, work alongside. And so they're buddies. And so that is just very frequent here. So you have to learn to state your facts, really know what you're doing. We know what we're supposed to be doing in SPD. We're not going to cut corners. You're not going to, because you forgot to bring a set, a few days ago that your doctor was going to need, you're not going to just bring it in the back door and take it to the room. Has that happened? Absolutely, it's happened. And we find out later on after the fact that, hey, that so-and-so brought that. And it's like, this is why we have standards and policies. But I mean, that mentality is alive and well. It's a daily struggle, but we're getting there by just having frank conversations with our surgeons. And for the most part, they're on board. I mean, they don't want to take chances with their patients. So it works out well. It's kind of the same thought process with recruiting and retention. I've been in this current role for probably a couple of years now at this facility. My retention was horrible at first. Not going to lie, my retention here has been horrible. I guess you could phrase it, she cleaned it up or whatever. My boss likes to say that. But once you start introducing, I don't like to bulldoze. I don't like to come in like a bulldozer and you're doing this wrong, we're going to change everything. So, the first year I just kind of stand back, make some minor suggestions and some, critical changes that if I think, need to happen right now. So I just watch and try to slowly bring that in. And sometimes people they just don't react well to any kind of change like that. When you start telling them standards, policies, and asking them, well, did you read the IFU on that instrument? They don't want to hear. They don't want to hear it. So people start leaving, and that's okay. So luckily, we were fortunate enough to have a very good surgical technology program here in Lubbock, Texas. That is an excellent program, and that director wanted to go ahead and take sterile processing on. And so that's how I got involved with that. So that has helped with recruitment and with retention because, I think my last cohort, there was 25. I have 25 students in my last one. The interest is there. And then they, move off to, Amarillo, Abilene, various cities like that, and they go on. So I believe we are the only sterile processing program in this area. So that made a huge change, not only for the area, but even for the current sterile processing techs, because what that did is it made the facilities here in this area look at their pay. Are you competitive? We were able to take that to them and say, listen, you're not really up to par with what, the field should be at. So it was an immediate pay raise for a lot of sterile processors that were already working when the program started, which was fantastic. That being said, I think we have, still a ways to go, but we'll get there.
That's so awesome that you're involved as an SPD instructor. And I'm curious on how do you balance those roles between your being an instructor, manager, your role, and dealing with all these physicians? What would be the hardest part of kind of bringing all those things together?
Oof. It's hard. I feel like I run all day long, and you have to keep a good notebook just to try to balance and write everything down. I try to simplify it with the fact that anything that I do at work, I try to take to class. In like knowledge and questions and situations that might come up. I don't go telling them exactly word for word, but issues, and then we just talk about it just to bring more awareness. My goal is the first semester is really clinical, right? It's really book work. We dive into all of the standards and everything like that. The second semester is usually clinicals, but yet we still have class. And so I try to do some review. We want to review the educational part of it with the PowerPoints. But that's usually when I start hitting them with little projects and assignments that aren't going to take up their time because they're doing clinicals, right? But like the last week, we gave them 2 weeks to do a project regarding IFUs. Their responsibility was to, at their sites that they're at, to pick an instrument or equipment. I want you to pull up an IFU, which means that they have to talk to them about where your IFU is at. I want you to go ahead and print out what you can. If it's like 80 pages, don't worry about it, but just specifically about the reprocessing. And then you're going to present it to us, and you're going to speak to me like you're teaching me how to reprocess this instrument. So I'm forcing them to be aware of what an IFU is. You should ask a vendor who's bringing in sets for their IFU. I don't know how many times most vendors don't even know what that is. And so little things like that they don't teach us. When most of us, when we started, we can honestly look back and say, yeah, I didn't even know what an IFU was. I know I didn't. For the longest time, I had no idea what that even meant until I finally asked somebody, like, what do you want me? And they were like, well, where's your IFUs? And I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. So trying to find that balance. So I just try to combine them both in the sense of, because otherwise I'll have different topics all day long, and then the voices will start talking and we'll never get anywhere.
Yeah. I'm curious, like, for those students that are, that you're getting those projects and you're learning, do you kind of give them from a manager perspective, like what you look for in those candidates of like, hey, when you're going to these sites, these are possibly interviews that you're dealing with, right? You're there on campus for those 400 hours. I'm just curious if you bring that light, because I know as a manager that has consistently had students in their facility at all the times, that's what we look for. We want them there, and we look for those people that wow us and that are engaged and they want to know what the IFU is, and they want to know what the right practice is. And then there we take a little note, and say, oh man, that one with the stars in their eyes, that's the one we want right there. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Absolutely. And we tell our students as well, a lot of them, they'll try to apply and they'll get the positions, because with our program, you can actually get a job and those hours do count. In second semester, they count towards your 400. So you're actually working your clinical, but you're also getting paid too, which we all know is a big issue. You can't just give up a whole semester of free time when you have a family to support. So for a lot of them, they do that. And I do, because a lot of them, they work for me here. So it's kind of I ride a fine line from being your instructor when I'm there, but when I'm here, I'm your boss. And put the phone away. I don't want to see it out, and I'm not going to do that. So a lot of them are kind of like, no, don't mess with her. Don't, so we'll talk about it here, and I don't, really bring too much of it here while I'm at work. When we get to class though, we kind of have a little discussion overall about what my expectations are as a manager. And if you think you're just going to walk the halls with your phone in your hand, that's just not going to happen. And so, they joke because they're like, some of the other places are like, it's not really fair because you kind of get first choice, first dibs on students. I'm not going to lie. It's nice.
I mean, yeah, you put in the time though, right? Like you're making all the investment, you're doing all that. So I think it's only fair that you get first pick.
Yeah. Usually they call and they're usually like, so how many do you have? I mean, listen, I need a couple, like what you got?
Yeah. So, like you're treating baseball players or something.
Absolutely. But the interest is always there, and it's great. A lot of them, they don't make it to actually, they'll do the whole program, they'll get their certification, but their interest at that point has evolved. So they get first dibs into going to the surgical technology program here.
Right.
So then we've had quite a few, usually about half my class kind of deviates after certification and graduation. And they're like, well, we want to do the surgical tech program, which is great. So I try to support that because we're all one unit and we're all trying to, and I tell my students all the time, that's great if that's what you want to do. I'm an OR tech too. That's always going to be kind of my first love of what I did and what I used to do. But on top of that, I tell them to take the knowledge that you've learned from SPD, even in your clinicals, that even the good and the bad, it can be ugly back here sometimes. You take that knowledge and you respect that when you remember where you're at and what you're doing and that communication, because there's nothing worse than having OR staff come back here and make you feel stupid and degrade you because, they're looking for something and that's what they're calling it. And you're like, listen, I know the formal name of it and this is how I was taught, but you're not going to have that because it's not ready yet, and then just that disparity of the attitudes. And so I always want to encourage them to remember where you came from and take that and build it better.
I love that comment though, too, for the trajectory that changes even over the course of these training programs. I think it's a really important reminder for anybody listening. If you're at the beginning of your career, if you're in the middle, or even toward the sunset of your career, if you're not in sterile processing because you want to be here, you probably shouldn't be here. It's hard enough. It's complex enough. It's stressful enough. We want people who this is their heart to beat. This is what they're addicted to. And it's okay if you're passing through and if you're getting experience, we get that. It happens all the time. It goes both ways. There's surgical techs that go through their training programs. They're like, yeah, actually, I don't like dealing with the patients that much. I just want to do the instruments. And so they go to SPD and everyone wins, right? So just being able to manage that, be honest with yourself. And then as an instructor and a manager, kind of identify that in your students and your employees and say, hey, I'm kind of sensing that this may not be the place for you, which is fine. Let's find a place for you that you can really thrive. And that's the best case scenario for the person and the team and the patient, because we all want to be at the top of our license, right? We want to be operating at that level. So Lee, we have quickly run out of time here today. I want to wrap with one more question that, just through the course of this interview has kind of been coming back again and again to some of the themes that Dusty and I have talked through the podcast, but also the vision for chapters and the vision for this podcast. It's even more important, I feel like, in how you describe life in these more remote areas like West Texas, because the community is even smaller. The resources out there are even fewer in terms of people to call, to connect with, to learn from. It's even harder to get large groups of people together like you would in some of these major metro areas. And so even this podcast to bring this kind of insight to managers that may be working down in South Texas or out in El Paso? Like El Paso is still it's very far away from Lubbock. Like you're both out in West Texas, but I mean, it's still hours and hours away, right?
I've never been there. I'll be honest with you. I've never been there.
I mean, it's like 11 hours. Like from the coast of Texas all the way out to El Paso. Like people not in Texas, they just cannot appreciate the distance there. But creating digital resources or new resources like this specifically for a state like ours, I think is absolutely critical. But I want to give you the last word. What you've learned in your career, in your time out there in West Texas as an instructor, as a leader, now as even one of the chapter leaders out there, like what would you encourage folks that are kind of in your similar situation, but maybe not plugged in and maybe they don't have that network? Like where would you tell them or encourage them to go first? Try to start building those networks. They're so critical.
I would say to look at the chapters that are close to them. For me, it's 4 hours, 5 hours away because we don't have one in Lubbock. A few years ago, I thought about starting one myself, but I didn't want to take on that whole project by myself. Yeah. It's a huge responsibility, and I don't feel like I'm equipped to do that myself. Like I had stated earlier, I'm not really familiar with how chapters work, so I'm learning that currently as we go. But my goal with speaking with Chevelle back then, this was 2 or 3 years ago, was to try to kind of unite and bring it out this way, to bring knowledge, right? Because, it sounds like a cliche, knowledge is power, but it really is. And for managers or people who are in leadership positions, I think the biggest thing for me is to not be afraid to sit there and have honest conversations with other managers about their dirty laundry. Okay. We all struggle with bioburden issues, quality audits with our sets and everything. But it's like when I ask that question, you get this look, they're like, well, I'm not going to share that with you. Like I'm asking for your social. I'm not, it happened not too long ago when we were I was having a conversation with somebody else and was watching how their team reprocesses something. And I only just asked, well, how are your quality audits? And I only asked because I looked in the window and I saw one of their techs in decon and they had a hoodie on. And so I was kind of like, oh, but I didn't say anything about it because I'm a guest. I didn't want to bring that. I didn't want to do that. But I think for me, it was, I said, so can I ask how your quality audits are at your facility? And he just looked at me straight faced and said, well, I'm sure it's kind of the same as yours. And wouldn't delve into it. And I was embarrassed because I was kind of like, well, apparently I did something wrong.
You touched on the sore spot.
How do we learn? How do we learn? If I have techs who can't seem to remember to put indicators in their trays, even if it's on a count sheet on the tracking system, and they still aren't doing it, we should be able to look at each other and have a conversation like, what's working for you? Because tell me, because I need help. Some kind of ideas. It doesn't mean, and that's what I would want to share with most managers and leadership. Sharing that information with others, like-minded individuals, it only makes us stronger, right? And how can we spread that awareness and that knowledge and lift each other up if we're not willing to be honest and have those conversations? It doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. It doesn't mean that a manager sucks at their job and they should totally quit and just go back to teching because they can't do it. It has nothing to do with that. It just means there's a lack of awareness and information. So let's have those conversations. I get on LinkedIn, I listen to the podcast, this podcast, I may not participate in chats, but I listen. My husband says you're just a stalker. And I guess I am, but that's where I glean information from also, right? Because I read the articles, I listen to the conversations, and then it makes me stop and think, oh, okay, so there's a whole topic. And so then I want to do more research myself. So then I will look it up and kind of do my own research to kind of find out, okay, this makes sense. Things that I didn't know previously. So, we have technology at our hands. I would tell people to use it. Listen to the podcast. I mean, you don't have to listen to it every day, but listen to it. Sometimes those topics they're like absolutely relatable to what you're doing right now. And you can learn so much from them and just reading articles and stuff. But I would like to see more participation or more, the chapters do really well and the conferences are really well. I would like to see more things geared for leadership just because I don't think there's a lot that's narrowly just where we can have frank conversations about what we entail as managers or directors, our responsibilities and duties. I know managers who don't even know what they're doing because it's a new role to them, a new atmosphere, a new environment. So,
yeah, which we've all been there. Like I've told that story before. Like you go one day, you're a tech, and then the following Monday, you're the manager. Nothing magical happens over the weekend besides your job title changes, like maybe get a new badge. But it's not like you know all this new stuff that you didn't know the day before. So yeah, somewhere you've got to learn it. Like I think that is terrific feedback. And Lea, I just want to say, as listening through the ears of our audience, I think what you shared is very brave and bold in that we've got to be honest with each other. And the more honest we are, the braver and bolder everyone else gets to be honest with our challenges and our breakdowns beyond just publicly being honest. But yeah, just those one-on-one conversations with another manager, just be honest. Like, hey, I don't got it all figured out. It's broken. I need help. And yeah, I really like that idea about how can we cultivate those kinds of opportunities specific to leaders. You got my mind racing here, so I have to think about that.
There you go.
So we're going to wrap it here. I just want to thank you for a terrific interview. I want to wish you the best on your new role as the VP of that DFW chapter. There's a lot to learn. There's a lot of great work to do. And now Dusty is up y'all's direction as well. So there's going to be even more hands on deck to help make that happen. But yeah, great interview today.
Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it. And I feel honored that you guys invited me. So thanks so much.
All right, that was Lea Clift, the VP of the DFW HSPA chapter and sterile processing manager out there in West Texas. We want to thank each and every one of you clean freaks for tuning in to Everything is Cleaner in Texas. I want to encourage you, just like we talked about on the show, if you're not already subscribed to this podcast, it's going to be a great resource for folks that are working in Texas. But obviously, there's the larger Beyond Clean podcast you can listen to. But there's probably like 10 or 12 other sterile processing podcasts out there today in all corners of our industry. Great conversations going on. But then also that chapter piece, the heartbeat of this podcast is to encourage chapter involvement, either in person at their events or at the very least become a member, get on the email chain, get involved digitally, hop on the conference calls. There's a lot of ways that you can bridge the gap, like Lea brought up today, to get plugged in and help yourself, to help your department, but also help departments across the street that also may be treating you or your friends and family one day. We want everyone to be as safe as possible and be able to fight dirty as good as they can. So thank you all again for all the support and encouragement. If you've got any thoughts or comments for a future episode of the show, or if you want to come on the podcast, if you're based in Texas, hit us up and we'll make it happen. And until we talk to you then, keep fighting dirty. All right. If you loved today's conversation, be sure to subscribe and leave us a review, because this fight against bioburden is as big as Texas. If you've got a sterile processing tip, story, or even product that's making it easier for Texas clean freaks to fight dirty, we want to hear about it. Connect with us on social media, anywhere you find Beyond Clean. That's Facebook, LinkedIn, X, and YouTube. Until next time, lasso up those dirty trays and saddle up those sterilizers, because we're about to show the world why everything's cleaner in Texas.